Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Bill Seeger, clinical professor of economics in the business department, and your host today, or MC, I guess, and we're hosting Dr. George Benson. Our webinar today is part of the corporate education webinar series, and we're sponsored by our great campus in Fort Worth, UTA Fort Worth. Mike Woolman is our director there, and we'll give him a chance later on to give us all the news about UTA Fort Worth a little bit later. In the meantime, this this semester, if you think of from a student perspective, we are very thankful to Dr. Benson because he has allowed and encouraged his great faculty to participate. So we're really focused, our theme is to focus on management, especially in these times of uncertainty. So that's our broad theme, and we have a variety of speakers from the Department of Management, which of course is led by Dr. Benson. So George, Dr. Benson, welcome, and thank you so much for your time today.
Well, certainly thank you for having me, and to everybody on the call today, thank you for taking time out of your afternoon to log in. And for those of you who are watching the recording, thank you for taking time to watch the recording. We are a pretty manageable group, and you guys probably have different perspectives and interests. And as I go through this, I've got a lot of slides, and this is based on some research I've been doing for more than a decade now. But if you guys have questions or want to talk about issues in your particular context, your particular organization, we can certainly turn this into more of a discussion. And so I'll just leave that up to you guys as we go through the deck. And so let me know if you have questions as we go along. Then I'll try to save some time at the end as well for some conversation. So I wouldn't be I wouldn't be a good UTA and department chair if I didn't put in a little plug, of course, for our HR program. So I teach in the program. I've been teaching staffing and performance management. I'm the former director of the MSHRM program, but I got to highlight that we got some nice top 10 rankings for anybody who's interested right here in your backyard. Okay, so we're talking about everybody's famous favorite topic today, performance evaluations. Yes,
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
performance evaluations, and I just ask everyone, the last time that you received a performance evaluation, I am sure that you felt energized, you felt engaged, you felt appropriately recognized and rewarded within your organization. It was a very uplifting process. For those of you guys that do performance evaluations for your staff, I know that the last time you went through the cycle that you were looking forward to it, and you are really excited about the opportunity to give lots of really good positive feedback to all of your staff and make them feel engaged and happy as well.
George, you're giving everyone the idea that you're stuck in the ivory tower. So we know you're joking.
No, this is good. This is good stuff. Everybody loves performance evaluation. Yeah. I go out and I speak regularly to HR groups, and look, performance evaluation is universally despised. And, yes. I remember about 10 years ago, I was working with some colleagues at the Center for Effective Organizations out of USC, and we did a series of case studies where we went out and we tried to find kind of leading edge companies that were really known for performance evaluation. What are you doing? What are you doing well? And I remember talking with process owner for PepsiCo. And PepsiCo is an incredible organization, of course. And one of the things that they're known the most for is like goal alignment across their organizations. I remember having a long conversation, and I said, well, what do you like about your performance evaluation process? And the answer was nothing. We hate it. Well, you guys are known for it. Like, you're the market leaders. And the quote was, if there was anything else, we would rather do it. like that, like we just need to change this, but we don't know what comes next. So I want to talk a little bit about what comes next. I think for HR performance evaluation systems, because we've seen a pretty large change over about the last 5 to going on 7, 8 years now. There's certainly some momentum. I think the momentum's been accelerated by COVID, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But before we talk about where we're going, I think it's important to understand kind of still where we are. I won't say where we've been, because the performance evaluation systems are still, for the vast majority of companies, look very similar to what they did in 1995. What does that look like? Nowadays, they're mostly online. Pick your favorite vendor, HRIS vendor. I've listed the big market leaders here. If I don't have your favorite listed here, my apologies. But in general, they're all the same. They're web-based systems. They can be fully customized, or you can just use the programmed off-the-shelf version. What do they look like? It's basically a split between the what and the how. So KPIs, goals, whatever you want to call them, results, as the what, in other words, your numeric quantitative goals. And then you have your how, which are your employee behaviors, and those are most commonly measured through a competency model that's been adapted and customized either for the entire organization or specific groups of employees. So you have a set of behaviors that you're rated on, you've had a set of outcomes that you're rated on, there's some sort of formula. That formula, the most common, ends up in a 5-point scale, which just seems to be the most common. There's no research to support that 5 points is any better than 7 or 4, but most people use a 5-point scale, and then link that somehow to rewards. Not the majority, but there's certainly a large minority of companies that are using forced ranking and calibration systems. So that takes many different varieties or flavors. But what is kind of the most common are these systems. If you are still using a customized Excel spreadsheet or a paper form, imagine that, oh my goodness, there's still plenty of them, and they're around. So this is what current performance appraisal systems look like. And, I just kind of asked the group as we're here, does this look familiar to you guys, these kinds of systems? So you've got the what and the how, still most commonly done on an annual basis, SMART goals and competency models, right? Okay. Why do we do all this, and where is it going? And if you survey managers and you ask, like, what's the purpose of doing performance evaluation systems, there's kind of 2 big ones that come out. And the most important one that everybody talks about is employee engagement and productivity. We're trying to improve performance. It's called performance management for a reason, with the goal of increasing performance. And then the second big reason is we need some way to make sure that we align our measurement systems with our reward system. So we need to make sure that our high performers are getting the high pay, and we need to try to move along our average and low performers into that larger group. I've got a paper here because I'm an academic and like academic research. This is about work engagement. This was this meta-analysis or study of studies that was done back in 2011, looking at the components of basically engagement and individual productivity, and the correlation between engagement scores and productivity is about 0.35. So it's not a huge predictor, but it is a predictor. And this is the general model based on a lot of different academic research going back 75 years about what leads to work engagement. And then on the end on the right side is job performance. And there's a lot of things here, but you can generally summarize these that it comes down to the nature of your job, that people are more engaged in jobs that have variety, that are interesting, that they feel are significant. Second of all, it's your boss. It's the people that you work for, the leadership. So it's the direction that you give and that you get, and that's the relationship that you have with your superiors. And then another one is the feedback. And this is why I bring this model up, and this is what going to talk about today, with really the goal here of, if we say that we want to improve performance, and how do we do that? We focus on engagement and goal alignment, right? If we want to improve performance with our performance evaluation systems, really we need to focus much less on the system and much more on the feedback that employees are getting from the system. And that means the feedback that you're getting from your boss. And so if we're thinking about what's the future performance management, what is cutting edge performance management, I'll just be very straightforward. It's performance management, performance evaluation systems that focus primarily on feedback to help you do your job better, feedback that's regular, that's consistent, feedback that's fair, feedback that allows employees to improve what they're doing and be better at their jobs. So we're going to focus on the feedback. Now, there's been a ton of studies of feedback going back 100 years, and these studies in general it show a variety of different outcomes based on a number of different things. And so this is a meta-analysis that was done a long time ago now, 25 years ago. But what you can see here is that while many studies show that there's a positive effect of feedback in the workplace on job performance, there's also at least a third of the studies found zero or negative relationship with feedback. What does that mean? That means that you get feedback from your boss that causes you to perform worse at your job. So the research since 1996 generally shows this same kind of stuff. And what this demonstrates is that it's not just feedback that's important, but it's the type of feedback that you give and how you deliver it that really makes the difference. So if you kind of take big summary of what is the research on feedback in the workplace, what it generally shows is that feedback improves performance, but it's really important about who's giving the feedback. You need to have a manager or a supervisor. The person that's giving you the feedback is somebody that you like and trust, somebody that you feel like has insight into your job, somebody that you feel like is giving you the feedback with the motivation of mutual benefit. They want you to do better in the workplace. So first of all, that your boss and the message really, really matters. Second of all, numbers, ratings, rankings, letters, they complicate things. They make it difficult to give good, honest, fair, direct feedback. And we'll talk about the future of numbers and ratings and force rankings in particular as we go through the material. So the best feedback, if you are, and by best, I mean the types that's most likely to improve performance. Positive and forward-looking, it's fair, it's non-threatening. And that's that motivation, that intention that you're trying to solve problems through mutual benefits. It's non-punishing. It's done for developmental reasons. You're trying to help the person to get better. And it's a two-way conversation, that it's not just downward feedback, but it includes employee participation. It allows people to respond. And the conversation is really about how do I get better as an employee? How do I improve performance at my job? Now we're in an online environment, the webinars, I can't see you guys, but typically somebody asks me at this point, they say, well, it's easy. Like giving positive feedback's easy. Everybody loves positive feedback. Unfortunately, sometimes you need to give bad news. Sometimes you need to give some hard feedback. And what the research shows is not the content of the feedback necessarily, but it's how it's delivered. And that indeed that you can give negative feedback in a positive way, if that makes sense. What does that mean? That means that you have a boss that you know and trust, that the person is genuinely giving you this negative feedback or how you need to improve on your job for mutual benefit. It's done in a non-threatening way. So you can give negative feedback, and in some cases, negative feedback is more positively received. And the specific example is just for people who work in high reliability jobs where you have to get it right, for example. And this ranges in all types of skills. A high reliability job would be, for example, a doctor. A high reliability job might also be in a manufacturing environment where or somebody is working with quality expectations. In other words, there's very specific outcome to the job that's either right or wrong. Turns out that people that work in high reliability jobs really appreciate being told when they're not getting it right. And so you can, this is just one example where you can give feedback that's quote unquote negative feedback, what you need to do better, what you're doing wrong, for example, in a positive way. So the best feedback looks like this, and what the research shows, it's not the feedback that does it. It's the reactions to the feedback. So it's how employees internalize the feedback that they're getting, whether or not they perceive it fair, whether or not it's related to their job, and those feedback reactions that then drive behavior change. So if you don't feel like your boss, your supervisor knows what they're talking about, or that the feedback is given with the intention of sort of punishing or rubbing your nose in it, that's going to cause you to react negatively and not change your behavior. So it's not the feedback, it's how people react to it. It's both the message and how it's delivered. And the feedback and how you do it on an ongoing basis is really critical to performance management systems, and really is the future of performance evaluation, which is going to look a lot less like numbers and letters and a lot more like coaching. So Cutting Edge is the name of the webinar, and this is just, if you guys are interested in some of the research here, this is done in 2016. It's about 5 years old now. We did a survey with some colleagues with the World at Work, where we identified what we felt were leading edge or cutting edge practices in performance evaluation and how companies were implementing them. You guys can get the full report on the web. This is what it is. But the practices that we looked at were constant coaching, rating lists, and then more social media based feedback. And I'm going to talk about two of these specifically today, which is the rating list appraisal and then constant coaching appraisal. Okay, so what is cutting edge evaluation? What am I talking about? What am I recommending for how you might change your evaluation processes? Here's a list of some of the companies that have embraced these practices over the last 5, 6, 8 years. Adobe was really the first one that kind of broke the seal and allowed other companies to embrace these new practices. And they ditched their traditional performance evaluation back in 2012. So the last 8 years, you've seen a lot of these changes. It was about 12 to 15 years ago, I'm thinking at the end of the aughts, when we started seeing all these articles in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and the business press about ditch the traditional performance evaluation. And we did a study back in 2010 where we tried to find companies that had genuinely done away with performance evaluations. And at the time we legitimately couldn't find any. The closest that we came were a couple of companies that had done away with performance evaluation for specific groups of employees. So for example, Capital One had done away with traditional evaluations for their executives. Cambia Health Systems, which is a Blue Cross insurer in the Pacific Northwest, had done away with evaluations for their call center employees. And so we did some specific case studies on these companies, but we couldn't find anybody that had just whole scale, like, we're not doing performance evaluation with the numbers and letters anymore until 2012 when Adobe started it. And these days you can see the companies here and the way that each of these companies does their current performance evaluation is very, very different, right? Each company has its own kind of flavor, but if there's commonalities among them, the most common one is increasing the frequency of feedback. So moving to a coaching model rather than a performance evaluation model for jobs that are like those high reliability jobs or jobs like call center jobs where you have clear performance criteria that are either being met or not being met. Companies are doing as much as they can to basically put the job outcomes, make them public to the people performing those jobs. So it's much more of a monitoring exercise rather than a supervisor coming along, once a quarter or once a year to tell you how you're doing. That employees are much more monitoring their own performance on a regular basis. So all of these companies have increased the frequency at which they expect supervisors and subordinates to interact about performance, and they call it different things, but the most common one is the check-in. And so check-ins are recommended, and we'll talk about what's the appropriate frequency in just a moment. The second big trend is fewer ratings. That means just fewer numbers and or letters. And by the way, that doesn't make any difference. But fewer ratings overall, and force ranking in general is going away. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and there's still, you know, a good percentage of companies that are out there. But the shine has come off of force ranking systems for a number of reasons, and the trend is moving quickly away from force distribution, force ranking, the bell curve, whatever you call it. So more frequent feedback, fewer ratings, much more emphasis on employee development rather than evaluation. And so these companies are kind of pioneering these trends, but we see when we did the study with World at Work, we saw these changes being embraced across all industries. It's not just high-tech firms, across all sizes of organizations, even in government and higher education, believe it or not. So feedback in the future is going to be hopefully much less driven by the practices that you're using and much more dependent on actual managers to provide the feedback. My impression, there's no hard data. I'm going to show you a couple of surveys that have been done, one by Aon, but there's no real hard data to suggest that that COVID has accelerated these changes, but that's my impression, that COVID has kind of laid bare some of the traditional challenges of performance evaluation, which is, hey, managers need to be in tune with what their employees are doing, and now that people are working virtually, you know, hey, do I even know what you're doing, let alone know what you're doing well enough to evaluate you on an annual basis, number one. And then number two, that the annual cycle, you know, when the lockdown started in March, that wasn't on our fiscal year plan, right? That changed either our, you know, June, July, or our December goals, and you know, we had to recalibrate. So, you know, if I'm making recommendations based on kind of what I'm seeing and hearing, what does evaluation look like in the time of COVID? First of all, consider a pause. A lot of companies, particularly in the first and second quarter of this year, just said we're not doing traditional performance evaluations anymore. Number one, because we've got a ton of disruption already, and we're just trying to keep the wheels on and keep things going. And then number two, just because of the stresses of COVID, and you know, I don't feel like I need a bullet or a piece of data here that says, hey, people are really stressed out right now, because we're all living it. So number one, consider a pause. Number two, you got to recalibrate your goals. And one of the things about COVID is that we need to focus on agility and adaptation. Everybody's been forced to do that. And that means agility and adaptation and what you think your goals are for the year. So that's both down at the individual team level, and then also for the organization as a whole. And then the final one that I would put here is focus on engagement, right? So the conversations right now should be much more about what do you need, how are you doing, realignment of the goals, and focus on the individual contributions to them, rather than here's your number, here's your evaluation, here's what you could do better. That there really needs to be much more employee engagement, and those review conversations or coaching conversations should focus on the support rather than the backward looking, how you're doing, focus on the future, what you need to do differently. Here's some data. This comes from Aon. This is a survey of 1,300 people, and this is their North American results. And they asked a series of questions about how COVID was creating challenges for performance evaluation, and what do you anticipate as changes based on this? And, you know, I've highlighted some of them here. So what performance evaluation processes have been more challenging for you? And more than half said getting managers to provide that coaching and feedback. The second was goal setting and their communication. And I think that we can all understand the reasons why here, just dealing with the amount of disruption and change to get managers and employees refocused on, hey, what you're doing and how you can do it differently. Second of all, what aspects have you changed in the past 6 months? And you'll see here over on the right-hand side that COVID is not driving an enormous amount of change. Like the changes to HR, changes to performance evaluation have been percolating for some time now. It wasn't just COVID. I think COVID's accelerating some of them, but you had to be in an organization that was open to this to begin with. The big one that you do see is about half of folks saying that they had to change their goal setting processes and how those were communicated. But this COVID hasn't caused people to ditch force rankings, for example, or numbers and letters, which I'm advocating, but this is not being driven by COVID. Finally, looking forward, right, as you move to a more virtual work environment, what aspects do you anticipate changing next year? And it's that greater emphasis on coaching and manager communication. So, and I would suggest that coaching and manager communication and the traditional number and letters system, to be perfectly honest, are at odds with one another. And so if you're going to emphasize continuous feedback and communication, you're going to naturally de-emphasize the numbers, the letters, the rankings, and rankings. They contradict one another, and I'll talk a little bit about that, which creates huge challenges in the conversation. And those of you guys that do performance evaluations probably have lived this, which is, once you give somebody a number or a letter for the year, it's very difficult to talk about what you're doing and how you can do differently. And the reason is because it triggers a social comparison. All of us want to feel like we're doing a good job at work, and all of us are primed to perceive equity or inequity about how our performance is evaluated relative to others. So even if you give somebody positive feedback, unless you're giving them all fives, you're a rock star on everything, they're going to focus on that 1 3.5 or that 1 4 rating that you gave them, and they're thinking about their coworkers. So numbers, letters, ratings, force ranking in particular, really prevents you from having a good positive feedback session with employees. So this greater emphasis on coaching and feedback aligns perfectly with what we're seeing in terms of new and cutting edge kind of systems. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now. Let me pause and see if anybody has any questions, and I'm going to talk about some practices that you guys can embrace. Anybody?
Yeah, Dr. Benson, we had a social media comment come in, that just a curiosity question that came in through Facebook that was asking, do you believe that from any research that you've come across or known about, that this starts at a very early age with the way that we grade kids, all the way up through higher education, and do you see any changes that maybe education is doing to see some positive changes, to come from evaluation, that type of thing?
That's a very interesting question. And I have not been asked this particular question before. I have 2 school-age daughters. I think some of this, in terms of like the equity perceptions, right, this is baked into us as human beings, and I don't think this is created by our school system. I think this is created by us as just social animals, right? And I always tell the story about, in our house we have I have 2 daughters, and we have if I have a cookie or a piece of cake or a piece of candy, it's like one person cuts, one person chooses, right? And why is that? Because that way it's fair, because it's equitable, because if one crumb's on one side, then that's not fair. And you don't have to tell a child what's fair. Now they know what's fair and not fair. So that kind of, those equity perceptions are certainly baked in, right? I think the school system and the notion that everybody needs to be graded, it's just part of our society. And in the workplace, the pushback that the resistance to getting rid of rankings predominantly comes from HR people who are worried about rewards, who are worried about how do we link up and make sure that pay is fairly linked to performance. And my reaction, or my response to all of them is that, like, you're trusting your managers to do it the same way they've always done it. So just because you're not using a number or a letter doesn't mean that you can't have differentiated rewards, doesn't mean that you can't tell your good employees that they're good and that you're not so good employees that they need to do better. But the whole, like, we receive grades going all the way through school. We're used to being ranked and stacked. I think it is part of our culture. This is not the same around the world. This is a kind of a very American notion of this meritocracy, and, take it down to the decimal level and this kinds of stuff. In more collectivist cultures, and the notion of team performance is much more important. Forced ranking systems cause huge cultural problems. People reject them. People resist them, actively undermine them. So I do think it's part of our kind of an American culture that, hey, we're a meritocracy. Everybody's going to get a grade, and you're going to be paid and promoted based on it. Does education contribute to that? I don't think it helps, but I don't think it's the cause. Hopefully that answers the question. I think I'm opining more than anything. Let me talk. Let me talk a little bit about. Go ahead, Michael. Was there another question?
No, I was just saying they responded with "Thank you for the insight." So,
okay. I talk about, when I talk about it, I talk about feedback culture, which is really where you want to go, because at the end of the day, it's not about your form, it's not about your system. All of those are just kind of artifacts. Those are just things, processes. What really matters is creating an open culture where managers give and receive feedback on a regular basis. It's expected. It's non-punishing. It's all about getting better as a group and as an individual. So how to create this feedback culture. And I think it's much more about the examples that managers set and top managers set than it is about the form. If you don't have a good culture, your process doesn't make a whit of difference, right? You can have the best performance management system, best practice, but if the culture is not open to it and your managers don't embrace it, it doesn't matter. You might as well just use the simplest form, which is, the classic, how's this employee doing this year? Okay, so feedback culture, how do you get there? It starts with leaders and teams. Managers have to be respected. They have to be real people. They have to be perceived as competent. Have to believe that the manager has a window into their performance and can see what they're doing. And the person has to be somebody that you like and respect. There's a concept known as leader-member exchange, and one of the measures is this person somebody you'd like to be friends with? Now, notice I didn't say are friends with, but somebody that you can see yourself being friends with, that spending time with. And pardon me, I know this is going to be recorded, and I probably shouldn't say this, but if you've got a bunch of managers who are assholes, it doesn't really matter what your processes are. You're not going to get good feedback. You're not going to have good performance evaluation. Like, the no asshole rule really matters. If you got a bunch of jerks as managers and the culture is I can be mean to you with impunity, then then start with that. And then don't try to fix your performance evaluation process. Similarly, within teams, you need to have positive culture. You got to have good collaboration. Psychologists call this psychological safety, which is basically, can you speak up? Can you voice your opinion? Can you be honest without fear of punishment, without fear of the hierarchy coming down and having a negative view of yourself? So this is other people's research. This is how we measure this stuff. And I'd be happy to go more into this if anybody has any questions. This is a concept known as leader-member exchange, and you can see how we measure it there. This is an actual study that we did with one of the big four firms looking at leader-member exchange, and you can see that the bottom horizontal axis is feedback quality. So we asked employees both, how do you get along with your boss? And do you respect your boss? Would you imagine being friends with them? And then we asked about the quality of feedback that you receive within your teams. The dots that you see are aggregated at the team level. And this is a very complex relationship that in academia that we call up and to the right, which is a positive relationship between that leader-member exchange and the quality of feedback. So teams that have better leaders receive better feedback. I know it's pretty elementary, but it really starts there. The second one is psych safety. Psych safety, it was coined by a Harvard professor named Benson, and it's really about the ability to take interpersonal risks within a team, that you can speak up, you can voice your opinion without fear of being embarrassed or rejected. We also measured psychological safety in teams, and I'm going to show you the same results from the same study. Here's some of the ways that you measured this with the survey questions that we used. And you can see again, up and to the right, that teams that have better psychological safety, where individual team members can speak up and voice their opinions, and we're all into this together, have better quality feedback. And this is aggregated across audit and tax consulting teams, a total of 700 people in one of the big 4 firms. So really feedback quality starts with your team quality and the quality of your supervisors, and that's gonna trump any practices that you can. I always start there. But what are the practices that you can use to promote this culture? So the first and foremost is, whenever possible, build feedback into the job. And all kinds of jobs, because of technology, you can give feedback directly to employees these days about how they're doing. And probably the biggest example of this is a call center, right? So folks who work in call center or operations jobs, and you see this in manufacturing environments as well, where how you're doing in your job is built directly into the job. In other words, the employees are getting the feedback on a moment-to-moment basis. You see some of this to a lesser extent in hospitals these days. You see it in delivery drivers, where they're being monitored by their GPS. I'm pretty sure that someday we're going to see this in the classroom, where I will have, or during a webinar, there'll be a little bar, that you guys will react to, that'll go up and down depending on how I'm doing in the class. But build the feedback into the job. The benefit of that is it allows managers to focus on not the what are you doing, but the how, right? So it allows them to focus on behavior and development and getting better at your job, rather than giving you your numbers for the day, the week, the quarter. So the feedback content, right? You want to focus on those competencies, those behavioral indicators. You want to focus on the how people are doing their job, rather than what the numbers are. So build the feedback into the job, allow managers to focus on getting better at your job. What this does is it makes the conversation between supervisors, subordinates, managers, and individual contributors, it turns that conversation forward-looking rather than backward-looking. It's not, here's how you did this, but it's more like, here's what you need to do in the future to be better at this, and it just changes the conversation. There's a group of folks that are out there advocating what they're calling feed-forward interviews instead of feedback interviews, which is completely forward-looking. What do you want to accomplish? What's important? What resources do you need from me as your supervisor to help you? What do you want to get better at, and how can I help you? So these kinds of conversations that are forward-looking rather than backward-looking. So number one, build the feedback into the job whenever possible. Number two, much more frequent conversations. The annual performance evaluation is just, it's very 20th century, right? So nothing's on an annual basis anymore. We need regular conversations, constant coaching. Like, let's talk about what we're doing, and let's talk about what you're doing and how you can get better. So the natural question is, well, like, how much is enough? What's regular feedback? So this is 5 years old. but this was with insurance company professionals. So these were HR folks, IT consultants, so high-level professional jobs. The blue and the green you can see there in the slides are the difference between their high performers and their regular performers, and the distribution there was about 1/3, 2/3. And we asked the employees, how often did you get a review from your boss? And then we asked them how satisfied with your review, and then how much does your boss encourage your professional development? And you can see from these data that the biggest difference is going from an annual evaluation to a quarterly evaluation, like 4 times a year, right? So if you're moving from your annual evaluation to even twice a year, there's a huge jump in the perceptions that you're encouraging my development and I'm satisfied with the feedback that I am getting. Once you get past 4 times a year, there's still a positive relationship, particularly for your high performers, and your high performers want more feedback. And yes, it's true, your younger employees want more feedback, and it doesn't all have to be positive feedback. I'd rather be told that I'm not getting it done than ignored, right? Where I just tune in once a year, we have a conversation in your office and that's it. So a huge benefit to moving to at least a quarterly conversation. Once you get past quarterly, there's not a lot of marginal additional benefit, certainly for professional development, but not for my feedback, right? And, I think what's the future of performance evaluation look like? If you are doing weekly or bi-weekly Zoom meetings with your staff, just check-ins, how you doing? What are we working on? What are your roadblocks? What are your successes? That's the future of performance evaluation. That's what constant coaching looks like. It's that regular check-in. I think virtual work has created more of a need for these regular check-ins, but certainly at least 4 times a year, probably more than that. That doesn't mean that weekly or bi-weekly is the way to go, but you certainly need to have more formal conversations on a more regular basis. Does anybody have any reactions to all this? What do you guys think? So more is better. You don't have to do it every day or weekly, but kind of the sweet spot is 4 more. 4 more. Okay.
George, I was going to pause for a minute, and as you had, I want to make sure there's time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, please. I'm not slowing George down. This is fascinating. Please put them in the chat if you have anything at all, so we can get them answered. I did want to say to George that real quickly, some reactions from me. As you know, I was in public accounting, and we did move from this performance evaluation with numbers.
Yep.
And we moved strongly towards the coaching mentality. It was supposed to be more constant. I tried to do it on every engagement on a daily basis if possible. It makes, I agree with you. It makes a lot of sense. And creating a feedback culture, though, is difficult. It's very difficult because people do not like to give the negative feedback at all. And so they'd rather sugarcoat that. So that's a bit of a failure in the system. So we even tried to train people, in giving feedback, have internal training and all that.
Yep.
But I'm really on board with everything you said. Now, I just want to make a comment that's meant to be humorous. So I come from public accounting with this constant feedback, and I come to the performance, let's say, evaluation system in academia. And it basically violates all the good things that you've been talking about. And I know this can be for coffee later on, but it is funny that you can have institutions that are really going to. I guess this is my point, not to criticize anyone. It's institutions that are leaning one way. It's really going to be difficult for them to kind of adjust to this more constant, feedback, as you call it. So anyway, I'll stop there and get your reaction.
Well, I led off at the very beginning with, higher education is a lagging indicator of the changes in performance evaluation, and this is definitely a do as I say, not as I do kind of environment. And yeah, it's a huge problem. And so let me address one of those, which is how to give that negative feedback.
Yeah.
One of the ways that makes that easier that companies can do is if you decouple the feedback sessions from the evaluation of the numbers and letters, right? And so what some companies have done, and I'll use an example like Price Waterhouse, for example. So you have a formal manager, right, who leads your team. Then you go and do engagements and you get feedback from the partner who was the engagement partner. But then they also have what they call a relationship partner who doesn't evaluate you, who doesn't work with you directly, and who is there much more as a career coach and as somebody who can look at your information and give you perhaps negative feedback, perhaps things that you need to do differently. But because it's not coming from the person that's determining your bonus and or your promotion suitability, it makes the conversation a lot easier. 360 reviews should not be done for pay and promotion, but they're very effective, particularly in like team-based environments. If you do like an after action report after that engagement and get some feedback. So you see this, in some of these newer companies, newer cutting edge, moving to those, like, let's get feedback from different sources and decouple it from the evaluation. Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of click through these real quick, and I'm hoping that I don't have to really, soapbox, but get rid of your forced distributions, right? There's just lots of negative things that happen with those. And really the companies that were kind of the bellwethers of the forced distribution, the stack ranking, Microsoft and GE have done away with them totally. They don't exist in those companies anymore. And so I think that tells you all that you need to know. So build the feedback into the job, more frequent check-ins, don't do forced distributions, de-emphasize the ratings. This is from a study that we did of a company that had done away with the numbers and letters. They did away with the rankings. Now they still did performance feedback, but we observed, we did it before and after, and we observed that the way that managers set their goals changed. They set more developmental goals than operational goals. And then the nature of the feedback. They use the pronoun we a lot more in their text-based feedback than they did the I pronoun. Okay, if you do away with ratings, developmental feedback and coaching goes up. And the theory is that, look, if you have to give a number or letter, it's difficult to give that developmental and that coaching at the same time. So focus on coaching and development, focus on feed forward, de-emphasize ratings. Developmental based feedback is good. I'll just leave that there, right? You guys can see this. So what kinds of HR practices can you do to promote this? So in our research, we're showing that the team climate and your leader behavior really, really matters. What else matters? Most important, predictive of perceptions of quality feedback in teams, top management communication, walking the talk. It has to come from the very top that feedback is important. Providing training, monitoring your your managers. In other words, do surveys of your employees and ask them if they're receiving quality feedback. And I talked to HR folks. I said, right now, can you think about your organization? Could you name me 2 or 3 or 5 people who are well known for being good coaches, who are well known for giving good feedback? And if you can't, that's a problem. You need to go out and ask people and figure out who these people are and build that into your HR systems and recognitions and talent management systems, because frankly, those are the people that you should be promoting. And you should be rewarding people for giving good feedback, for embracing feedback culture within their teams.
George, I was going to mention that like from my experience, well, for economists, when I'm talking to my class, it's all about incentives. And I did notice that I was in a culture, the feedback culture, and a lot of training, and I was a partner. Partners didn't get, any kind of benefit or any kind of higher rating because of feedback. So we had a problem there, is that you're encouraging it, but there was no reward for it. And that's probably why when you ask HR people who are the good people that they give feedback, there could be no incentive. So nobody is really trying to pay any attention to that.
For sure. You need to reward and recognize that. You need to make those people examples. It has to be, in addition to making your numbers, right? How you develop your employees needs to be part of the part of
the, you know, part of your scorecard, even though we shouldn't use that. And also a question came in, and thus Mike is going to pose it to you.
Go ahead, Mike.
Sure. So Lane had asked, we have always evolved one and only HR person in the yearly involved, I should say, one and only HR person in the yearly evaluations for documentation purposes. We have 50 employees. So if we did the review check-ins 4 times a year, that's about 400 reviews to document and monitor. How would the feedback get documented back to the end HR manager with this 4-time-a-year model?
So I'm going to challenge the premise of the question, which is, does your HR manager need to be involved in all these conversations? And if you have an old style performance evaluation, and that old style performance evaluation is about documentation, is about differentiation, is about making sure that you've got the winners and losers so that you can recognize them and manage the other people out, that's when you have to have an HR manager who's making sure that you're not violating EEO laws, that you're not creating any risk for the organization. If the conversation is much more of a coaching and development kind of feedback session, does your HR manager need to be at every one of these sessions? And I would submit probably not, right? Is that really a good use of your time? And as a matter of fact, it might prevent the manager and their employee from having a really good conversation because, hey, the referee is here, somebody is here from corporate to monitor what we're doing. So I totally get that there's a practical side of saying, hey, you need to meet with all of your people on a much more regular basis. And if you're thinking about those meetings as the formal performance evaluation, where you go through, here's how you did on all your metrics, and here's how you got a 4.5 on this and a 3. If the conversation is like that, then yeah, it's going to be hugely cumbersome. This is going to be a giant pain in the neck. Performance evaluation time for managers is a terrible time. You spend weeks doing this stuff. Okay. This is not what we're talking about with a new style kind of coaching model. It's much more like a weekly check-in, like, how you doing? What can I do to help? I'd like you to focus on these things for the next couple of weeks. Let's see if we can address this particular issue. What do you need from me? And so it's going to be much shorter, much more developmental, and it's much more of a kind of a, how are we doing check-in? Let's make sure that we got our goals aligned, rather than I'm going to go through a 10-page performance evaluation and talk to you about your professionalism and or your creativity and or your whatever else is on your competency model. I put this slide in here. Go ahead, Bill, if you have a question.
No, I was going to say that was a super response, and I'm glad you said it. Because I've been in the feedback culture. And so anytime I had any contact with a person regarding anything that we were doing with clients, because it was consulting, then I took that as an opportunity to give feedback. So it wasn't a formal, we're going to have a feedback session. It was just part and parcel of the natural interaction I had with my folks.
That's exactly
right. I'm glad you made that distinction.
So we're driving home from the meeting. Hey, let's talk about how it went. Right. This kinds of stuff. Hey, we're getting coffee. Let's talk about what we're doing today. It's those kinds of meetings, and then using those as an opportunity to give recommendations and also solicit questions. What can I do to help you? What are you struggling? What are your challenges that you're having? What would you like to get better at? Those kinds of conversations. So get away from this notion that it's a 5-point scale and 3 decimal places, and we're doing all this.
Yeah, perfect.
I put this slide. I put this slide here as a way, and I can talk more about this, but we're kind of in the interest of time. The takeaway from this one is if you think about the what and the how, which are 2 large pieces of our traditional performance evaluation system, right? Which are clear behaviors, right? And then clear results. So certain jobs, the behaviors are very clear. Certain jobs, the results are very clear. Other jobs, much more ambiguous. I think the future of performance evaluation is going to be customized by the nature of the job. So people that like production employees in call centers where the feedback is built into the job, it's just going to be monitoring. You're not going to get performance evaluations. Why? Because it's constant. Other kinds of jobs where the outcomes are very clear, but there's many paths to success, like top executives or doctors, are going to be a much more of a coaching model, right? So, hey, your P&L is very clear. Your health outcomes are very clear. I don't need to tell you about that. Let's talk about your personal style and what you can do to get better. So just that the performance evaluation is going to be customized by the nature of the job. And this is, I think, where companies should be going. You shouldn't have the same performance evaluation form for the entire company, even if the competencies and the outcomes are different for every job. All right, in the slides that I have that remain are a series of company examples about these check-in processes. I'm happy to share. This is all public domain information. Right? So what Microsoft is doing, what GE is doing, what Deloitte is doing. This is kind of the Deloitte 4 questions. There's an HBR article on this one that they talk about this, but different kinds of examples. The one that I'll finish on is Patagonia. And Patagonia is a very interesting company. And I was at a meeting, and the CHRO for Patagonia was presenting their system. And after doing all this research, I was always kind of skeptical. I'm not really sure about this, particularly on some of the social media parts of it. And I saw him present. I'm like, wow, they've got it figured out. That is really what the future performance evaluation system looks like. And what is it? Okay. They have changed their whole model. Instead of feedback giving, like, I give feedback to my employees, to feedback seeking. And instead of mandating that everybody does an annual evaluation, they mandate that all their employees seek feedback from somebody, 2 to 3 people per quarter. So you have a traditional conversation with your boss about your OKRs, your goals for the year. You set some stretch goals that might be operationally oriented, or more likely they're developmental stretch goals. And then you're required to go seek feedback. And those can be from your coworkers, they can be from your bosses, your customers, your internal team members, whomever. And they have a system that's built into their HR system there. You can specifically ping people, and there's a form that they use, and then they also give text-based feedback, and you can also talk to them on the phone. So you have conversations with your manager about what am I working on, what I learned, what I want to do next, but then you also solicit feedback from your coworkers through this social media based system. And they were saying, well, in the first couple of rounds, it was very generic kind of feedback. You're great, you're a rock star, this kinds of stuff. And once people realized that this really was for developmental purposes and not for evaluation purposes, that the feedback got really open and honest. And the people that you seek the feedback from are the people that you know the best, the people that know your work, and they're able to give very detailed developmental feedback, things that you can work on with specific implementable changes that you can address. And this has also had a side effect within Patagonia, which is because this is built into their HR system, they can see, the HR folks can see who's being requested for feedback. Right? So they know who kind of the nodes of the organization are, who are the key people that other people respect enough to seek out their opinions of them. And it's been a huge benefit to their talent management systems because they use that and they feed it into their promotions and these kinds of things. So given where we are in time, I'll stop. I don't know if I left any time for additional questions, but if anybody has any comments or reactions, I'll take them, and I'll just say you can reach out to me anytime.
Well, George, thank you. This was terrific, and thank you for your time. Folks, if you have any other questions, comments, please write to us, and particularly George, and there's the contact information.
Yep.
At this time, we will turn it over to Mike Woolman for some final comments. Mike, please take it away.
First of all, thank you so much. I mean, I can't echo enough what Dr. Seeger just mentioned, George. I mean, honestly, this information is so absolutely valuable, especially to me. I mean, I'll just be honest on a personal note. I'm in an interim director position right now, last 8 months. And my huge focus has been just about developing some culture changes internally at my own campus. And as much as, you know, employee evaluations, I think are very antiquated across higher education in general, as you've mentioned previously. The ability to shift culture internally by using tools that we have at our disposal, I think by
Yes.
doing self-evaluations, by doing, I'm absolutely going to implement Patagonia's model that you just displayed, because I think that is such an awesome thing that they are doing there. So we appreciate your time today, because we know how valuable that is. If there are any questions, I'm still checking the chat box there. Rutaba, thank you for being here. And they just mentioned thank you for hosting this. We do have some upcoming webinars. You know, UTA Fort Worth cannot be, you know, more appreciative of the relationship that we have with the College of Business, which is where Dr. Seeger and Dr. Benson are coming to us from. We have great partnerships with them, with our programs that we offer at the satellite campus in downtown Fort Worth, and we continue to expand those opportunities, much of which comes from feedback from all of you as folks that are in the industry that are looking for new degrees to be offered out here. So we always are appreciating any kind of feedback and response that you can give to us. My contact information, you could find out our information at fortworth.uta.edu. I'm going to try and pull up here real quick and share a screen.
I'm going to stop my share there, Michael. There you go.
Do we have our future?
Let's see. Just real quick. Just going to do the good old.
There we are.
Can you see my screen? Okay. So we do have upcoming webinars here. I'm going to just, no, not beginning the slide. Dr. Ann McFadden is going to be with us, and I apologize for putting title TBD. And Dr. Seeger, please do throw it out verbally right now if you already have that title. But she will be joining us on November 5th for our next webinar. Phenomenal speaker, and you know, the same type of thing that you did today for Dr. Benson's registration process, same form. You get to sign up right there for our next webinar. We have adaptive leadership in times of change. Dr. Marvin Brittingham is going to
right
us on 19th, and then we are putting a closing out the Fall 20 series with our Secrets of Great Leaders and Teams with Dr. Cynthia St. John, who, you know, very excited to have her on today, or excuse me, today, this semester. And, you know, so we're just excited to keep offering resources like this. You know, the idea is it is very timely. As Dr. Benson mentioned today, it's about continuous professional development and coaching. So, you know, as many free resources like this that we can provide at UTA Fort Worth, we're appreciative, and in College of Business is who provides that expertise. So we can't thank you enough again, Dr. Benson, for giving us an hour of your time today. This has been great information, and it's very easy to immediately start applying it, I think, in certain ways. You know, we can't change entire corporation culture obviously overnight, and maybe not be in a position of power to do so, but I think that by being able to open up our minds and seeing kind of where the future actually is and where we can be, you know, you can implement these things at a lower level in your own position, just really as to become a better manager and leader. So we appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thanks again, George.
Thank you for having me.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye, and goodbye to our audience. And goodbye to Mike Woolman.
Yep.